I am Anna Seewald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. Today's episode is all about the fundamental principles of conscious parenting. How not to take things personally. How our children do not need a perfect parent. How we do not need to hurt our children in order to teach them. When we understand children's behavior better, we're less triggered by it and we aren't as pulled into trying to control them. Instead, we can put some of our attention on how we are feeling, and through this awareness, begin to change the way we respond to them. We change the question from, what can I do to my child to get them to behave, to how can I be with my child to support them, to learn and grow into the people they're capable of becoming. That's the essence of being a conscious parent, says my guest, longtime friend and colleague, a returning guest, Bridget Miller. And I agree with her. Bridget Miller is a preschool and elementary teacher, remedial therapist, presenter, and parent consultant. She's an authorized facilitator of the Neufeld Institute, the creator of the popular Look with Love and Parenting with Intention conscious parenting pages on Facebook and Instagram, and a brand new author. Her book is called What Young Children Need You to Know, How to See Them So You Know What to Do for Them. I was honored to receive an early copy of her book, and I wrote a blurb for the book. I think it's an essential guide, and it should be in the hands of every busy parent who is on the path of conscious parenting. It's down to earth, heart-centered, rooted in developmental science, and most importantly, deeply compassionate, just like Bridget. And please do not be misled by the word young in the title. What Bridget shares in the book applies to the child inside everyone, regardless of their chronological age. To learn more about Bridget and her work, visit her website, bridgetmiller.com. Be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. For full episode show notes, ways to work with me, and as a listener, you always get a 10% discount. And additional parenting resources, visit my website, authenticparenting.com. And now, please enjoy this lovely interview with my dear friend, Bridget Miller. Bridget, welcome to the podcast again. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you for inviting me back, Anna. I love coming to chat to you.
It was a long time ago that we connected. I think that was the first year or second year of podcasting. And it was a very emotional time for me. And that episode really, resonates with me. That was one of the most special episodes that we recorded because of where I was in my personal life and what I was going through. I think the title of the episode is The Hardship of Uprooting and Establishing a Life in a New Place, as I'm remembering it correctly. So thank you again for joining me today, and congratulations on your upcoming book.
Well, thank you. It's just such a treat to be able to share it with you. And I really, really appreciate you reading it early for me and giving me some feedback. Hearing your kind words and knowing that it resonated with you made a huge difference to me too. So thank you for that.
Yes, it's a warm, compassionate guide, essential. I think every parent should read this book. And since I was lucky to read the book and have a copy, I want to start this conversation by going to the last chapter and started from the end.
Okay.
Chapter 55, I don't need a perfect parent. What is with that? We all want to be the perfect parent, right? We fall into this perfectionist trap somehow. And I love how you talk about that. It's so warm and kind. How can we let go of perfection and just be and enjoy parenting? What is your take on this point?
Well, I think all of us, when we either know that we're going to become parents or we adopt children and become parents, regardless of how the children in our lives come to us, we set out with the intention of wanting to be the very best parents that we can be. And we have very high ideals of what that will look like. And that comes from a place of really good intention, wanting to show up for them and give them and be for them everything that they could possibly need. The problem with parenting is that we tend to focus more on what we're not doing than all that we already are. And that can be something that really, it wears us down because we're constantly striving for something we maybe feel like we're not achieving. And I think anytime we strive for perfection, be it in parenting or anything else, for me, it's a form of soul suffering because you're never going to match up to the ideals that you're holding in your head. I know for me that I need to keep my focus on taking small steps because that's what's going to get me where I want to go. But I think it also starts with having some compassion for yourself. You know, when we can give ourselves a little bit of grace that we're not measuring up to those ideals, we can back off a little bit and maybe just remind ourselves that we are human.
Mm. Were you a perfectionistic parent too? Did you fall into this trap as well?
I don't know that I would consider myself a perfectionist, but I do know that I constantly wanted to be better. So I guess that could be the same thing. I know for myself, I wanted to get it right. And in parenting, there is no real right. You know, I think it can lead us away from our hearts and we become parents who lead with the head, which means we seek out maybe techniques to try and get our children to behave in certain ways in order to match up with what we think they need to be doing or how they need to be behaving. And I think that's for me when there became a bit of a disconnect, when I found myself maybe trying to shape their behavior instead of just understanding where it was coming from.
Yeah, that's a big one. And plus expectations, right? I was talking to a friend the other day on my walk, and she has high regard for doctors and nurses, especially during this time. And she said, I really want my daughter to become a doctor one day. And it's a very honorable job. I said, does your daughter want to become a doctor? She says, no, of course not. It's my mom's dream and my dream. I looked at her, I said, but it's not hers. Are you sure you want to choose this path? And, she says, yes. We sort of had an argument, but then I guess she thought about it a little more and we had a discussion the next day. It's hard for her, she told me, to part with this notion that her daughter can become whoever she wants to become. She wants to believe in it. But from the other hand, she wants her daughter to have this perfect life that she has imagined in her mind because she loves her.
Yes, very, very much so. I think, given that we have perspective and life experience, we've learned things along the way. And I think for many of us, we want to spare our children having to go through the same difficulties maybe that we've been through. So through our adult eyes, we can see what might look like a shortcut to get them where we think that they need to be in order to be happy people. But we have to remind ourselves that we're all here to walk our own path. And any discomfort or block in the road or disappointment is part of their journey in order to grow them to be who they're capable of being. We want to look out for them, but we don't want to limit their own life experiences.
Yeah, that's hard to do though. Do you have any suggestions for the parent who is dealing with this kind of dilemma? They find themselves wanting to make everything perfect, wanting to make things magical and exciting and entertain their children, who are trying very hard. I know so many parents like that, sadly, who are really sometimes killing themselves to be the best parent that they can be.
Well, I think a lot of parents, they measure their ability as a parent based on their child's behavior. I think that's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
And when parents are faced with a child who is unhappy, many of us take it to heart and think it must be our fault. If we did something differently, then they wouldn't have to experience that upset. But really, any time that a child does stumble across something that isn't going their way, that is one of their biggest growth opportunities. And it's what we do with it that's going to make a difference. I mean, regardless of our age, we learn more from what doesn't work than what does. That's how we learn our lessons. And our job as parents is not to fix everything, because when we do fix things, we rob them of opportunities to learn and grow. But what we do need to be there is to be the ones who are able to guide them through their upsets and to be there for them when things don't go their way. Having a parent on your side who gets you and is okay with your discomfort and that doesn't jump in to fix everything opens the opportunity for a child to be able to feel their feelings of how sad something is, or how upsetting something is, or how frustrating something is. And they feel those feelings rather than having them distracted by a parent who quickly fixes things. That's going to be their true growth. A parent who can be there in their discomfort and be there to comfort them is what's going to bring that resilience. Resilience comes from feeling the sadness in what's not working and having someone there who can pat you on the back and be there and say, we'll get through this together. I believe in you.
Yes. In chapter 46 of your book, you talk about that. I need kindness most when I appear to deserve it least.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And in moments where we are faced with, an example would be in a young child, it could be an old child too, but what we would call a temper tantrum. In those moments, their behavior goes against everything we've tried to teach them. And that can make us respond from a place of wanting to shut down that behavior because we want them to do better. But in that moment, they really, really can't. Many of us were raised to believe that we needed to clamp down on unwanted behavior in that moment. Otherwise, it was just going to become the norm. But anytime a child is in that space, what they're doing is expressing the frustration of what's not working for them. They feel so uncomfortable on the inside that it has to come out. And that's exactly what big emotions are supposed to do. They are supposed to come out. And in young children, it's going to be loud and it's going to be messy. But our job is to know that and hold space for them to have those big feelings and to do it in a way that we still hold the boundaries. This isn't about saying you're very frustrated, you can do whatever you want. This is us acknowledging you're very frustrated and it needs to move, but I'm going to help you. So it's finding that balance between still having those boundaries, which children need, and being gentle, holding that space, and then moving through it with them so that they can come out on the other side better for having had those big feelings. When we're afraid of big behavior, what we do is we get sucked into it. We get so fixated as parents trying to stop it that we actually block the true learning, which is going to take place if a child feels those feelings and moves through it.
So truly, it's this work has to begin on the level of mindset, correct? Instead of asking, what can I do to my child to get them to behave? We switched the question into how can I be with my child to support them to learn and grow into the people they are capable of becoming. I love this questioning.
Yes, it's a complete shift in the way that we see our children. And that's very much like on Facebook, my page is Look with Love. Because although we love our children, we need to look at all of their behavior through those eyes of love. They're not out to get us. But in that moment, how we respond is going to be determined by how we see them. We need to shift our perspective and see them as needing our help, not needing punishment or our hostility. That can bring a complete change to the energy that we bring to an experience that we're having with them. When we're afraid of their big behavior, something inside of us just makes us want to make it stop. But when we let our hearts go out to a child who's having a really, really hard time, that makes us want to help them. And then we soften our response because it feels right.
I think when the difficulty arises when we get sucked in and there's a challenging situation and we're triggered emotionally, it's sort of what we know, how we think, a great mindset or conscious parenting ideals we may have, it just goes out the window. We're unable to practice it, right? On a practical level.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And that's why what I'm sharing with you doesn't happen overnight. There is no fast forward on this process. It starts with an awareness and a willingness. Like first we have to be willing to look at why we are so triggered. Think it's about our children, but it's everything to do with what else is maybe not working in our life. So we can't rush this process. We start with just being content with noticing. If we can, in those moments, we find ourselves feeling very, very triggered, rather than thinking to ourselves, what can I do to change them? Just turn it inwards and go, oh, how am I feeling now? And maybe that's, in the beginning, that has to be enough. But that little bit of awareness will bring out in you the very next time you're in a similar situation. Again, you check in with yourself. And then the other piece I would say that is key to being able to do this is taking the time to understand children's behavior. A lot of the way that we respond is because we misread what we're seeing in them. We think it's a problem when actually it's just who they are developmentally. When we understand where behavior is coming from, we're much more equipped not to get sucked into it. And it doesn't feel as personal. It's just where they are developmentally.
Yes, I think every parent should learn about the development of their children's age. It's important to know what's happening at this stage, because let's say it's a 3-year-old and they're having a tantrum or they're having a meltdown. If you view that as a misbehavior, it is a bad behavior, or you're in a public place, then you're not going to show up as this loving, conscious parent, right? Everything you wanted to do, it's sort of, you're unable to apply because you view the behavior as something I want to stop, get rid of. This is embarrassing. Why is this happening? I like how you sort of how it starts with the parent, right? It's good to learn about children and their development, to have this knowledge. I think that's one branch of this. The second branch is the parent who has to do the work on themselves, because we're all going to get triggered. It's not going to be easy for any of us. I've never met a parent who has it all figured out and has this nice flowy relationship with their children. I think, right? I've never met anyone. That would not be normal. And so
I think if you look on Facebook or Instagram, you see pictures of what maybe makes you think that that's how they're living, this glorious, perfect life. And I think that can make us harder on ourselves too, because we think maybe we are not measuring up to the way other people are doing it. But the reality is, behind every closed door, there has to be upset and behaviors that we don't want and all of those things. But every time we're faced with one of those, it's an opportunity for us to help our children to grow, but it's also an opportunity for us to grow up alongside them.
Yes, I think adopting that mindset and having that tattooed in our brain, or is key. Is key, because then you will be constantly reminded of it, that this is all right. I am growing, so is my child, right?
Yes, and it's completely normal. Like, behavior is going to come out in lots of different ways, and sometimes it comes out as big unwanted behavior, but it's still as valid. Like, we are very good at inviting emotion in our children when it's the good and the happy and the joyful. We're very quick to embrace that, but we tend to want to try and shut down the noisy and the loud and the resistant and all of that. But it's all coming from the place of emotion, and all emotion is valid. So even a temper tantrum is actually a gift to us, but we have to be okay with it. And we have to understand a little bit of where it's coming from, and to know it's not our job to fix it.
Yes, I think also with that, it's not our job to fix it. I don't want that to go to a very extreme as far as neglectful parenting, you know?
Yes, and that's where that awareness comes in. As a parent, it is our responsibility to raise our children up to know, what's okay and what's not. And in the beginning, that's our job, is to give them those boundaries and to keep in mind all that is happening inside of them is nature actually doing its work as well. Like, Mother Nature is there to support us and to help us to grow our children up, in the sense that a lot developmentally is going to happen in terms of their brain development. Like, we want to be able to hold space for them to have their big feelings, to teach them what it is that they need to know, so that one day they do the right thing when no one is there watching. So there's different steps through it, and we have to show up with our children, obviously depending on their age. They need different things from us. But this is not saying your children are frustrated, let them just hang it all out and do whatever it is. That wouldn't be a responsible parent. Our job is to show up and to lead and guide them, but not to resort to it in a way that's coercive and punitive.
Yes, yes. I think, that's a good distinction. So having this awareness, I think firstly, I just want to put into steps everything what you said about the parent who has to do the work. Firstly, it begins with your commitment, your willingness to practice this kind of parenting, to adopt the notion that I am going to be a conscious parent, a peaceful parent, to have that willingness, right? It takes that courage, that commitment, that willingness, that intention that we set for ourselves. I'm going to be that kind of parent. I'm not going to punish or hurt my child, even though we may, on the way of parenting, for example, I have committed to that type of parenting, but of course I fail and I make mistakes. I think the first step is to commit to that type of parenting, to have that mindset, and then every time we fail or we get stuck or we're triggered, to work on our awareness, right? Why am I being triggered? Why is this? What is showing up for me? How am I feeling? What's happening for me? Turning the question to us as opposed to how can I get rid of this? Look at this child. Let me fix this or get rid of this, punish this child. And then if we have learned about child development, then sort of we would know what to do in the moment. There is no right technique or skill that we can teach ubiquitously to everyone, right? Everybody sort of has to do what's right for them in that moment. It's more of an action. How I show up for my daughter, how I support her looks very differently than how Bridget or Maria shows up for her child. But the main thing is we are showing up. We're trying to be present. We're trying to practice this kind of parenting, right?
Yes. Oh, yes, most definitely. And to know that in those moments, it's not going to be a straight line like you've described. you might set the intention to not yell at your child today. And then at 9:30 in the morning, you've already blown that intention out the water because your frustration got the better of you. That doesn't make you a bad parent. It becomes an invitation for you to look at what happened inside of yourself and not to beat yourself up for it. Like, you can feel the sadness in it that you've disappointed yourself. You haven't matched up to the expectation maybe that you put on yourself. And when you can feel the sadness in that, you will find a sense inside of you that makes you want to show up again tomorrow. If you don't match up to your expectation and all you do is get mad with yourself, that's going to fuel your system with more frustration, and you're going to be harder on yourself. And then things just get more and more difficult. So it starts from that place of the willingness to show up, as you said, that commitment, but then also the ability to give yourself some grace. You are only human and you are going to fall down. But feeling the sadness is much, much better, and it's going to serve you more because you can feel your feelings about it. When you can feel sad that things didn't go the way you wanted to, that is going to move the frustration out of your system, and you are going to show up and keep trying instead of giving up.
Then what are some practical ways the listener can do to develop deeper self-awareness in those moments, or become perhaps more self-compassionate?
I think the word I would cling to for that is just to notice. Like in the beginning, you don't have to do anything other than maybe just notice. Like if your frustration gets the best of you and you yell at your child, just turn inwards and pay a little bit of attention to how you feel on the inside. Like, of course, you'll know that you are frustrated, but you probably also have a sense of sadness in you for what you've just done. That sense of disappointment in yourself. That's much harder to feel because it's more vulnerable. But that's the very beginning. And when you are more self-compassionate, you are more compassionate with others. Like when you look at a child who's having a temper tantrum and your heart goes out to them, you want to help them. And the same is true for yourself. Just back off a little bit and just say to yourself, I really tried and I blew it, but I love, love, love my child and I want to keep showing up. That will keep you moving forward. This is an emotional process. It's not a cognitive process. If all we had to do was convince ourselves that we would be more patient people, we would all be more patient. If it was just a matter of following a few steps, we would all already be that. But it's not. It requires us to feel our feelings. And that's what helps us to grow.
I love how you say that it's an emotional process, not cognitive. The reason I'm trying to put into steps is just to offer the listener a bit of a framework, because I always hear from my listener that it's very helpful how it looks like step by step, this process. I know this is a very fluid, natural, organic, messy process, and it looks differently for everyone. And you're right, cognitively, like I'm an amazing parent cognitively.
Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh. If we were all fabulous like we thought we were in our imagination, no one would show up to do the work.
But then there is this other side that when we mess up, some of us have this inner critic, inner narrator, the voice in your head telling you, you failed again. You said you're never going to yell, but you failed again. And that could be all consuming. Do you have any suggestion how to deal with those negative thoughts, self-judgmental thoughts that rise when we make a mistake or when we trip in those moments?
Well, yes. And I mean, I'm not a counselor, so that's out of my realm in terms of the what to do and how to walk someone through that process. But as a parent, that first step is noticing and then giving ourselves some grace. That doesn't take therapy as such. It takes an awareness and a willingness. But for somebody who is very stuck in those perseverating thoughts, that's where someone as a therapist or a counselor can really help, because they hold space for you when you can't maybe do it for yourself.
Mm.
And then to remember that every time you have an interaction with a child, it is a real life opportunity for you to give yourself some grace. Like, the love that you have for your child is what helps you to show up for them. And by showing up for them, you're showing up for yourself too. So this is something that you do consistently, and then you fall down, and then you pick yourself up because you love them.
How about when we take things personally? It could be, preteen who says, "I hate you, mommy, you're so mean." Or it could be a disrespectful behavior by a toddler or a preschooler, any age, right? I have a listener whose daughter is verbally very mean to her mother. The child is not the listener, the mother is the listener, but she always says that, my daughter is verbally very rude, attacking, and she takes it personally. She's struggling with it. She's doing a lot of cognitive work not to take it personally. How can we stop taking things personally? What our children say, what they do? What is your experience?
Yes. Well, in those moments when a child is lashing out at you and you are stupid and they wish you were dead and they hate you, that's an expression of the frustration that's being thrown out of them and onto you. So the first thing is to recognize this child in this moment is very frustrated. They also, in that moment, don't have what we call the brain integration to be able to contain what they say, which is why they come across as so very rude and abrasive. In that moment, how they feel is how they act, and what they think is what they say. Their brain cannot access what we would call the mixed feelings, or the other hand thoughts, which part of me is really frustrated with my mom right now, but part of me knows if I call her names, I'm going to get into trouble. Those are two different thoughts, and they can't be in the same place at the same time. So the behavior that we see is very, very big, and it's ugly. But if we know in that moment that right then, regardless of the child's age, that they can't do any better than they are right now, that can help us not to jump into it with them and try and get them to change their mind in that moment. We often make things so much more difficult for them and for ourselves by trying to change their behavior in that moment. Like, in that moment, they can't take in anything more. We might start telling them how that hurts our feelings, and they know better than that, and that's not okay, and that's not, that's disrespectful. We go down that road of trying to change their mind in order to change their behavior. What they need in that moment is to express it. And then your question about what do we do so that we don't take it personally, in the back of our mind, to remember the minute something feels personal, we act from a wounded place. So when we come at them because they've triggered something in us, we too lose our brain integration. And that's why as parents, we might say or do something that is outside of the scope of what we would consider to be acceptable. So both you and your child in that moment are in that place of extreme frustration, and none of it is personal. Even though the words might feel very searing and hurt your feelings, in that moment, if you can just say to yourself, this isn't personal, it might be the beginning of you being able to just close your mouth and not feed into what's going on. Again, it goes back to that being aware. And it's not that we leave it there. Our lessons are taught outside of the incident. So regardless, again, of the age of your child, it could be a 5-year-old, it could be a 15-year-old, it could be a 45-year-old. We do want to address the behavior, but when we're in connection. So when we've had, like with a young child, we've had bath time and story time and everybody's calmed down, that's when you slide in the lessons. That when you called mommy a poo-poo head and you wished I was dead, that's not okay. We don't talk to mommy like that. But in the moment, they actually couldn't help themselves. They do know better. We get very, very frustrated with our children because they know better than they do a lot of the time. You know, in the moment, they can't help themselves, but outside of the moment, they do know what our expectations are. And we have to just give them some grace that with time and us holding space, they will get where they need to go. But it starts with the awareness in us and that it's not personal.
Yeah, even though it does feel personal, and even though they know better, it repeats. That kind of behavior comes back again and again and again, correct?
That's the thing, that this is not going to fix itself overnight. Every other interaction you have with them is building connection. And when you have connection, that's when they learn from you. So they are picking up along the way all the things that you're wanting them to know, but you're also holding space for their emotion to move so that they can grow.
What if it could be hard to move into a connection place with your child, especially your child called you a very offensive, rude comment? During one of my support calls, and I don't want to say, a curse word on my podcast, this particular child said something very offensive to the mother, and she took it personally. And she found herself not wanting to connect with her daughter, even though she knows that this is what's going to work. Outside of the incident, you need to connect and then teach the lesson or work on a skill or something like that. But again, she found herself not wanting to connect, resenting her child. What can you say about that parent? How can this woman move into a connected place?
I think it requires her to soften her eyes, like to think about the things that she loves about her daughter. It sounds to me like she's got very stuck in her own emotion. Like maybe she's not feeling the sadness in her own life of all the things that aren't working. She's just fighting against it. When we get trapped in trying to change children's behavior, it's enormously frustrating because we're trying to control children who can't maybe yet control themselves. Yeah, and the relationship has to be bigger than behavior. Like regardless of what your child has called you in that moment of frustration, you're still their mom and they're still your child and you do still love them. We have to hang on to that. And sometimes when we are very stuck in our own emotion, we do need to go and get some help with a therapist or a counselor or somebody that can help us to address why it is that we are not moving through our big feelings. When we are very frustrated people, we're not very pleasant to be around because we dump it all over the show.
Yes. And to be reminded of that, your child's behavior isn't always a reflection of your parenting skills. And you talk about that in chapter 3 of your book, which I love this. Can you speak about that? We talked about not taking things personally, but also knowing that our children's behavior is not a reflection of our parenting skills. When they do well, we want to take pride. That's my kid, right? When they do poorly, we feel embarrassed and we feel shameful, right? Why are we like this? Our children are separate human beings, but why is it so hard to
well, I think that, part of that is we kind of look at our children as extensions of ourselves, which they are. But they're not walking in the world, in a true sense, here to represent what a good job we did as parents. We're still learning how to be a parent. Like nobody knows how to be a parent until you're in it. And that's the reason that we need to be able to become very adaptive and pay attention to how we're feeling, because we're going to have to constantly change the way we do things. And to remember that children are learning and developing all the time. And that means what worked on them yesterday might not work tomorrow if we're using it as a technique. Because they're learning and growing, they shift the goalposts on us. So we need to become very adaptable because we have to meet them where they are, not where they once were. To know that, especially young children, they're supposed to be loud and messy and unreasonable. Developmentally, that's who they are. And if we try and make them anything other than that, that's enormously frustrating for us. And then we think we're not doing a very good job. And we respond to them out of a place of fear or embarrassment because their behavior doesn't match what we've taught them.
Yeah, we fear that people may notice and say, that parent is not doing their job very well. Look at that child's behavior, right?
Oh, yes. And there's nothing quite like parenting in the spotlight. Like, you will find yourself in situations in the supermarket where your child starts throwing a hissy fit. You start acting out of a place of fear, which leads you away from your heart's intentions, which is to teach and guide your child. And instead, you'll find yourself trying to control your child because you want to alleviate the embarrassment in the spotlight that's on you. When we can give ourselves that grace and go, this is a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old, they're tired, they've had a long day, they needed to go home, but I needed to buy bread on the way home. That's just when it comes out. It's a difficult thing to do, but I often say parents need to grow a very thick skin because everybody's going to have an opinion on how you parent your child. Yeah. And that's why we have to pay attention. What we think is more important than what the rest of the world thinks, but that's a very difficult thing for a lot of us to do.
That's for sure. Speaking of public parenting, with the whole coronavirus and remote working, I've been working from home. And, through Zoom, I see my clients over video, and I'm working from my bedroom. And of course, my family is home. I told my daughter, do not disturb, I'm working, do not disturb. I'll be, out in 2 hours. And I was wearing pajama pants, but a nice top because I know I'm going to be seated, and it's a Christmas themed pajama pants, even worse. So I started my session with the client, and here I am talking and teaching about parenting. And of course, there's a knock on my door and it gets louder and louder. Mom.
Oh.
And of course, my client sees that I am a little disturbed already, annoyed. And he says, you can get that. And I'm looking at him and thinking, no, I can't get that. I don't want to get that because I have pajama pants. And then the knocking doesn't stop. I'm like, what's happening? I mean, I told my daughter she should know. Then my husband is knocking on the door. I'm like, Jesus Christ, what's happening?
Can't you all just pay attention and follow the rules?
And eventually I opened the door, and I guess I was angry at them. I was annoyed, and I said, what do you want? Can you see I'm working? And my daughter says, Mom, my nose is bleeding.
Oh, you see, and context is everything.
Context is everything. However, and the tissues were in this bathroom. They had to go through my quote unquote bedroom office to get to the tissues. But when I returned to my computer, my client looked at me and said, I am very happy about my parenting right now because I just saw that you don't always practice what you teach.
Yes. Well, that's the part about we're all human. And we all, we sometimes know better than we do.
Yes.
In the moment, it's going to be what it's going to be, but it goes back to that awareness and the context. I love that you said that, because the context of why your daughter was banging on the door is that you are her go-to person when she needs you, and you're between her and the tissues. Like, she had to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And in the moment, maybe she couldn't think, maybe go to the kitchen and use paper towel or whatever else. But it just goes to show that in that moment, you had your own agenda as well. You were showing up for someone else. And things just get messy sometimes. That's just what it looks like.
And now we
and
can
then you repair the connection afterwards. That's when
we
you'll have that conversation with her and say, oh gosh, when I lost my mind or whatever that conversation is. But you repair the connection and the relationship goes on in spite of the behavior.
And now we can tell the story and laugh about it.
Exactly, because we're a little bit removed from it.
Yes.
In the moment, that was not funny because your brain couldn't see the humor in it. You couldn't see the other side.
Yes, I was getting annoyed and angry that,
Yes.
they're not allowing me to work. How dare they do, even though she had a reasonable, valid nose bleeding incident. Still, I
Yes.
wasn't able to show up with love and compassion because I was absorbed in my work and not being embarrassed in front of this person.
Yes. And then after that incident, you need to sit with it and give yourself some grace. Like you've assessed it from all the different angles. Like you told them what you wanted. You had to show up and do this as your job. You have to be a certain way when you do what you do. And then this happened. It was out of your control. And then you followed up with them and you can say, this is what happened or whatever else. But more importantly, you can sit with it and look at it from different angles. Mm-hmm. And then you realize, I'm not a bad person. I was just stressed in that moment.
Yes. I also like the point, chapter 1 of your book is titled, Who I Grow Up to Become Isn't Completely Up to You. Mm-hmm. And I always talk about this on the podcast. And I really would love to hear your thoughts. How come? How so? Aren't we supposed to raise our kids? Isn't it our responsibility who they become, how we shape them? I mean, no?
Oh, it is. Our responsibility is to provide the conditions that they need to grow in. We provide the foundation. We could call it the soil for which their roots are going to grow into. That's going to be what gives them their basis to grow. But what we need to remember is that Mother Nature is on our side. Like what I alluded to earlier, in the sense that development happens on the inside and it happens quietly. Like a child who is still developing is growing self-control. That's happening on the inside in terms of brain development. Their emotional system is learning to process all their different feelings. They're starting to understand who they are and how their actions impact others and their world. All those things are happening on the inside, which we don't necessarily see because we're so busy, managing the day-to-day affairs of our children. But we need to relax a little bit and know that not everything is up to us. We're there to support them and we're there to help them. And we're there to say no when a no is needed. All those things add together to create safety in the context of having boundaries and limits and restrictions. And then we teach them through our connection. But we don't need to worry about doing it all. Mother Nature is going to do her part too. But we have to work with her.
And so that leads me to ask you then another follow-up question. What do you think children need most from us?
Oh, Anna, that's a big one. I think the word would be our, there's so many different layers. I would say our compassion, because when we're compassionate, we give them the other things that come with that. We give them our understanding. We give them our love. We give them our support. We give them the opportunity to be who they are without trying to change who they are. And I think in a lot of ways we see ourselves in them and they're in us. Like we're all connected.
What has been the biggest learning experience for you as a mom, as a parent? Your children are 16 and 18. You have grown alongside your daughters. When you look back, what was the biggest challenge that you worked on as a person? What was the area that you did the most growing?
I think, oh gosh, let me think about this. Again, one thing leads into another, but I think my biggest lesson in all of this is to just show up. I think that's what it is. It's to show up and be who they need you to be in that moment. Like sometimes they need you to be the bad guy who says, no, you may not have another cookie. And then you have to be okay with whatever's going to come your way because you've been the bad guy. And then to show up in other days, like it's not about fixing things. Sometimes you just show up and they need you to just listen and hold space for them. I think it's just finding ways to meet them wherever they are as best as I can. And then to just keep trying, not give up.
What is your hope with the book? The book is almost out in the world. What is your biggest hope, your dream?
I hope that it's going to shift the way that parents see their children. The way I've written it is very much an everyday parenting language. It's short chapters, like two or 3 pages is every entry. And I hope that what it's going to do is soften the eyes of parents who read it. By reading it and seeing, there's developmental theory hidden inside it. There are personal stories. And then I've also put in a section that says, here's what you can do. And I think parents, when they read it, will quickly begin to see that it's not about what you do to your children, it's how to be with them. And that by the end of every little chapter, it will reset them so that they feel like they are not alone. I hope it'll feel like they can pick it up and it'll feel like they've had a conversation with a friend who understands where they are and has been there in many of those instances.
When can the listener find you online?
My Facebook page is Look with Love Bridget. And then I have a second page on both Facebook and Instagram called Parenting with Intention. And then my website is my name, bridgetmiller.com.
Bridget, I want to thank you for joining me again and sharing your wisdom. I love the book. It's warm, compassionate, heartfelt, just the way you write, the way you are, your work. We've been connected for a while via social media, and I truly adore you as my online friend. And hopefully we will meet one day in real life.
Oh, I'm counting the days, Anna. Who knows when that'll be, but I'm quite sure one of these days it'll be a reunion. And like you say, I've known you for the longest time online. I've never had the opportunity to meet you personally, but I know that the day will come when we do, and it'll be as though we've always been together.
Good luck with the book, and congrats again, and a big virtual hug.
Oh, thank you, Anna, and straight back to you. Thank you for the opportunity.